So like, suppose you hear some good financial advice, like, hey, you shouldn't try to pick stocks to beat the market. The mistake is not acting on that information right away. So maybe what you should do is you should go, revisit your strategy for investing and decide what's the right path forward. But if instead you just sort of don't think about it, or you don't see the flaw in what you're doing, like, you can easily kind of know in your head the good advice that you're hearing, but then you can not act on it for multiple years. And
you're listening to the Millionaires Unveiled podcast, where you'll hear the stories and interviews of everyday millionaires. We'll unveil their decisions, their strategies, and their current portfolio allocation. Now to your hosts, Clark Sheffield and Jace Mattinson.
Welcome back to another episode of the Millionaires Unveiled podcast. This is episode number 280. Hope everybody's having a great week. Man, it's been a little wild here with the weather here in Texas. We're basically shut down for a few days last week, and sure it affected several people that were traveling anyway, if they're on American or Southwest, as two big hubs go through DFW and Love. But at any rate, getting back to the norm here a little bit, and we'll begin rocking and rolling here into February. So wanted to discuss a couple things. Our guest today has a couple unique things that he has in terms of compensation package in regards to RSUs that we've talked a little bit about on the show before, but are pretty common in some sorts of industries and companies. But the other thing that I wanted to get a little bit more in depth on is he has a significant amount of money in retirement accounts already, especially for being in his early 30s. And he participates in what's called a mega backdoor Roth. And basically what that is he's able to, through his employer, make after-tax contributions to his 401k and then essentially roll those into an IRA or a Roth if he decides to. So anyway, that's what he's been doing from a standpoint of maxing out his retirement accounts. And so he does have a significant balance relative to his age for that. I was doing a little research, and Vanguard said that about 12% employees, back in 2020, 12% of employees maxed out 401k plans that had access to them. And about 10% of those that had after-tax ability, meaning they can make contributions after tax to that 401k, participated. So it's a very small subset of probably the population in general that even has access to this. I don't know how many employers would offer this, but those that do, only 10% or even participate in it. So a very, very small subset of the population is doing this. In this case, our guest this week has access to it and has been doing it. And that's how he's been able to accumulate such a significant amount in his retirement accounts at such an early age. So interesting thing to kind of dive into if you're interested in that. It's really a way for those that want to be, super savers to be able to contribute, outside of the traditional max contributions that IRS publishes and stuff. There's all sorts of tricks and things you can do and strategies. So he's participated in that and just wanted to highlight that a little bit, given that some we haven't really talked about on the show that I remember, and also the RSUs. We could probably do a whole episode just on those, but it gets pretty complicated. But basically, it's a piece of his compensation from an equity standpoint, and they vest monthly in his case, and he's able to sell those and turn them into cash. So it's a big piece of his compensation package. So, and this week and his name's Kristopher. He's in his early 30s. Net worth is just over $1.1 million. He's got about $160,000 of that in cash. And then the rest are investments, about $930,000 in investments. $30,000 of that's in an HSA, which is a pretty high balance for somebody his age. And then the rest is broken up into those retirement accounts. He also has $17,000 at 529. So great discussion with him. One thing that we did not include in his net worth that he does have is those RSUs, and he said there's worth that he's been granted at this point about $740,000. But as long as he's employed, they vest, and he can do whatever he wants with them as they vest in terms of selling them or keeping them, in that stock with his company. But if he leaves or gets fired or whatever, he loses them. So interesting kind of topics and discussion that we'll have with Kristopher this week. Real excited for this episode. Last week we had Jerry, net worth of $2 million. mainly invested in alternative asset classes like real estate, notes, and gold and silver and whatnot. So great episode with Jerry. He's much more of a contrarian investor compared to what we normally have on the show. So if you're interested in that, go check that out. It's episode 279. Once again, if you'd like to be on the show, send us an email, millionairesunveiled@gmail.com. Also looking for that 300th episode out there still. Somebody maybe has a significant level of net worth. We'd love to interview you and kind of get to know somebody who's done things on a completely different level than maybe a majority of our guests. We always learn something new from them, even if we don't have that level of net worth. So without any further delay, let's get into the episode with Kristopher.
So Kristopher, thanks for coming on. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. It's great to have this opportunity to share my story, and also I've kind of been able to self-reflect a little bit from this interview.
Well, we're appreciative you're willing to take the time and share with us. So tell us a little bit about you, just a little quick 30-second, 1-minute overview about who we're talking with now.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's really great to be on this show and get to share my story. I'm a senior software engineer. I'm currently working at one of the large companies in the Bay Area, one of the FANG companies. And I'm married with one kid, been married for 6 years. Currently living with my in-laws who are helping us raise our kid. And
oh yeah, that's great. And what is your current net worth?
I'm at 1.103 million as of a couple weeks ago.
Okay, so we'll call it 1.1, and I know you're one of our younger millionaires, so I think that's interesting and something to note here. So let's jump into allocation first, Kristopher, and then we'll go back through the story a little bit. So how is the 1.1, just big bucket items, broken up?
Sure. So I guess first thing is the emergency fund. That's it's in checking and savings accounts plus a handful of cash minus any outstanding credit card balances. That's $18,000. And then I've never bought a house, and I've been saving up for a house for multiple years, like several years. And I have $140,000 in a savings account that's allocated for a down payment. And then I have $17,000 in a 529 account, and that's in stocks. I think it's 60% US, 40% international. And I track that separately because I do plan to give it away at some point. And everything else I consider to be my investments, and that's $928,000. By account type, that's $30,000 in an HSA, $290,000 in traditional 401ks, and then $370,000 in Roth IRAs and 401ks, and $235,000 in savings and brokerage accounts. By asset allocation, I have 38% in the U.S. stock market, 32% international, 20% in the U.S. small caps, and then 10% in cash or bonds. It's about 50-50 on cash and bonds. And it's also not part of my assets or net worth, but I also have unvested RSUs from my employer, and I kind of think that's important because it gives me stock market exposure in addition to my savings. And currently I have $740,000 in unvested RSUs.
Wow. And do you have restrictions on that, on how long you have to hold them?
They vest monthly, so most of that is from my initial grants, and it'll finish vesting in the next 2 years. There's some rules about the time of the month when you can sell them, but for the most part, they vest monthly, and they count as cash. As income, they count as cash, and then you can sell them, which is what I do.
Yeah. So you sell them all right away. You don't let them sit in the market at all. How come?
There's a couple of reasons for that. There's actually, there's been several people working on the arguments for why it's good to sell. I mean, you already have high exposure to the risks of your company just because of your employment through them, and then you also have that's just a lot of money to have in a single company. And if you do sell them, when you get them, there's no disadvantage. You don't have any penalties. You don't have any capital gains or anything.
Gotcha. So, I mean, props to you here, Kristopher, on being pretty well allocated and diversified. I mean, especially on the HSA. The HSA is something that Jason and I don't hear we think enough. So props to you. I mean, you said close to 30,000, right, on the HSA?
Yeah. It's pretty nice. And I think one thing I like about my company is they have like internal discussions about like how to invest and how to use the tools that are available. So their default healthcare plan goes hand in hand with an HSA, and it's recommended, and almost everybody at the company, I would assume, is using this HSA. So the employer puts 2,000 in every year, and then I put in the rest to max it out. And so I've gone from, I think I had 1,000 in the HSA when I joined my current employer 2 years ago, and then just in the last 3 calendar years, I've got it up to 30,000.
So, Kristopher, great job on the HSA. The thing that's really interesting to me on your allocation is you're young and you have almost $650,000 in retirement accounts.
Yes.
375 in the Roth, almost 300 in the traditional. So really, it's even closer to, what is that, like 675-ish?
Yeah.
So how did you get that much in there?
Yeah, I guess that's. I mean, there was basically 2 paths. There's like, do you start putting it in real estate or do you put it in stocks? And since I was going the stocks route, it was basically trying to max everything I could. Now it did take me it took me a couple years to get in the habit of savings, but after the first couple years of working, like I really started to max out all the accounts. So I've been maxing out the 401k since maybe 2012 or 2013, and then I've been maxing out the IRA the same amount of time. And I've been maxing out my wife's IRA since 2015, and she's had a 401k for the last couple of years. And then also I've been able to do the mega backdoor Roth for the last couple of years.
Wow. So you've done so you did, let's call it 18,500 or 19,000 each per year, right? So that gets you 38. Then you do 55 in the Roth. That's another 11. So that gives you 50-ish. That's what you've been doing for the last several years?
Yeah, I think it's, so this year, for example, so it's 56 or so thousand in my 401k, and then 19,000 or so in my wife's 401k, and then 2 backdoor Roth IRAs as well. So that's
because now you've got higher income and you can't do a traditional, or you can't do the regular IRA, right? So you got to go backdoor. Okay, makes sense. And are you happy with your company's offerings and what you can invest in through the retirement accounts?
Yeah, it's pretty good. It's guard, and I'm using a target date retirement fund.
Okay. So you have, let me just push you on your allocation a little bit. You said, I heard in one 40% international, on another it was like 33 or 34, maybe big picture for international holdings. Is that right?
Yeah, 32.
So how come so much in international? Or maybe you say, Clark, that's not so much. I don't know what you mean.
Yeah, I know there's like some difference of opinion on how much should be there. Yeah, I think so. If you're trying to match sort of like a real, like matching how much international is really out there in the world versus US, it would be closer to like 45% international. And then you scale it back a little bit because of course we're living in the US, and we're buying stuff in US dollars and such. So just based on that, I went with 32% international. It's kind of similar to how the 529 breaks it up, and that's it's based on some like popular asset allocation that Vanguard recommends.
Gotcha. So yeah, just to reiterate here, 1.1 million net worth. You got about 675 in retirement accounts. Some of that in a Roth, some of that in a traditional brokerage account with another couple hundred or 185, and then cash. So how come you haven't bought a home? You talked a little bit about that at the beginning, or how come no real estate investments? And I guess, is that in the plan for the future?
Yeah, it's been really one thing after the next. So at one point I tried to buy a duplex and it was a little bit out of my price range. That was in like late 2013. So I think the problem back then was I really just didn't have a plan. Like when I found out I couldn't afford that duplex, I didn't pursue it. I didn't pursue like getting a smaller place or a condo or something. And then by 2015, I got married. I moved into a studio with my wife. And whenever I checked the cost of renting the studio versus buying like a 2-bedroom, it always favored the renting because it was such a small place. So because of that, I just kind of year after year, I decided to keep renting. And then I think I got kind of ready ready to actually buy maybe like within 6 months before the pandemic hit. And we were kind of waiting for my wife's grad school to finish up because we lived right next to that school. And so we were basically getting ready to buy, and then the pandemic hit. So we relocated to another city with a lower cost of living. We're currently in Tracy, California, kind of about 1 hour outside the Bay Area. Just because it's a new city, we decided to rent. And at this point, we don't really know what city to move to. It sort of depends on employment options, especially for my wife.
Sure.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
And
she works outside the home full time as well, right?
Yeah. So she graduated about a year ago, and she's been working full time since then. Currently looking at a job transition, and so it's unclear what city the office would be in, and whether or not she'd be working from home. It's kind of difficult to decide where to buy right now.
Okay. So, Kristopher, you got the RSUs, the stock units. How come you don't include that in your net worth?
Just because they're unvested. So as they vest each month, it comes in as income. And if I left the company right now, I wouldn't get any of that money. So it's kind of, it's just, I'll get it when it vests, I guess.
How does it play out if they were to fire you? And I'm not saying just for performance. Would you get any of that money?
So in those cases, no. As far as I remember, there is one perk where if, like, in case I die, they do pay that out as some sort of like alternative to life insurance. But I think that's just sort of them offering a benefit. It's really not my equity until it vests, as far as I know.
And how much vests monthly?
So my initial the initial grant that I got was $500,000 of stock, and then that vests monthly over 4 years, and that appreciated a bit. So now it's vesting at like over 100,000 a year, but monthly. So like 10,000 a month, and then I have additional refreshers that I get each year. So far I've got one since I've been at the company for about 2 years, and that's vesting at like I think about like 2,000 per month.
Awesome. Good for you.
So, Kristopher, I kind of want to go back to the beginning a little bit here. How did this all begin, and maybe sprinkle in there what it's like living in a high cost of living area and what that looks like, as it relates to your mindset and developing wealth and saving?
Sure. Well, that's a lot to unpack in that question. So I guess, like, in terms of mindset, one thing I've noticed is that there's a lot of money in this area. And so when you have $1 million, it's sort of average. Well, at least if you're in tech, like, you might as well assume that, you're a millionaire and all your coworkers might be millionaires too. There's also, for example, my parents and some other people in that generation often have $1 or $2 million in home equity. So the mindset for me is like $1 million is a good start, but it's really that's it. Not close to financial independence or any sort of like affluence, I guess. I guess that was part of your question. I mean, I don't know if I might have missed other part of it.
No, totally. So, I mean, growing up in an area where basically you assume, or it's pretty well assumed that everyone's a millionaire, whether it's they've got $1 million in investments or they got $1 million in home equity, just because of the nature of that area and what's taken place over the last 30 and 40 years. How has living in that environment played into your mindset and developing and building wealth? And maybe for our listeners, and some of the things that you shared with us in writing in is, hey, you know what, $1 million for me is like, I mean, that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg. I mean, it's just kind of the base level starting point in a lot of ways, just because of cost of living and what you're surrounded by. So being as young as you are, I mean, obviously you're around a lot of others that are very wealthy too, at a very young age in a lot of cases, where maybe in other parts of the country that's not as common. How has that played into your mindset and what your and get on your journey?
Yeah, I think, well, it's every time I hear somebody on a podcast talk about their budget, I have to sort of translate it to what things cost in this area to kind of understand what they're talking about. But I think the real difference that I see in my budget is just rent. I mean, like for example, groceries for our family of 5 is like 1,000 or 1,200 a month. It's not like way more than it might be in other areas. So I think on the expense side, it's mostly about rent. I think living in this area, you do get used to, you see like Teslas and BMWs and Maseratis like all over, and you just kind of get used to it. And you just kind of have to acknowledge that it's worth it to some people and not worth it to other people to own those.
So do you look at building wealth in a different mindset because it is so expensive? I mean, when you go to negotiate salary for your career or just a comp package in general, are you going after your RSUs every single time, or would that be pretty normal to ask for? And then in terms of asking and putting together a package for you personally as it relates to, cash income, how does that go about? Is that something that, hey, if you're living in this area, it's a non-starter if somebody's not giving you some RSUs?
Let's see. So I guess if I'm looking for job offers, I'm looking at what is the market rate, and I'm looking at what companies are offering. And you kind of have to like discard what you think might be a good number and just look at what they're paying and go for that. Because if it was up to me, like I would accept a $100,000 salary. That sounds like a lot of money. But then when there's like information online that says these companies are offering 300,000, then you just sort of have to play greedy until you go through the offer process.
So I want to shift gears a little bit. Where do you go from here? Is there a target net worth? Do you plan on building quite a bit of that through RSUs in the future?
Yeah, so what I like right now about my situation is my savings rate. It's between like 200 and 300,000 a year is what I'm able to save. And so I'm kind of want to be defensive about that. So for example, if I rent, I might be able to rent for 3,000. If I buy a place, I might be paying like 9,000 PITI plus maintenance. So I'm like a little bit defensive. Like I don't want to go buy a home and mess up my savings rate, because I think the savings rate is in a good place, and anything that would kind of get in the way of that is something that I need to be like cautious about. So mostly my goal now is kind of just to like run through the career and keep the savings rate as long as I can. And like I think my career is going fine, but there still should be promotions in my future, and my wife's career is just getting off the ground really. So I think she has promotions and a long career ahead. So it's just kind of running through those and like keeping the family running as well.
Yeah. I mean, you've obviously done tremendously well. So congrats on your success. As you mentioned the savings rate, as much as you're comfortable sharing, normally we ask this at the end, but I think it fits in here. What's been your range of household income since you started working?
Yeah, so I was working at startups for 8 years, and I started as a new college grad making 80,000. And then by the end of those 8 years, I was a senior software engineer making 180,000. And then when I got, so after that, I joined this company that I'm currently working at. And the offer I got was 190,000 base, 15% bonus. And then the RSUs were $500,000 vesting over 4 years. So it was like 340,000. And then additionally, like the stock has gone up since then. It's doubled in 2 years. And I've also gotten the annual refresher on top of that. So I made like 360 and the household income was 420. And this year household income should be over 500.
Wow. Good for you. And you say over 40% of that?
Yeah. I've kind of been tracking. So I'm looking every quarter. I'm looking at net worth and savings rate, and I'm doing my rebalancing. And I'm looking at the savings rate over the past 4 quarters, and it's gone up past 200,000. And in the last 4 quarters, I saved 270,000, and it should go up until my RSU grant that I got in 2019 is done vesting.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing because When I look at you sent us a couple notes before the show here, and your net worth in December of 2019 was $475,000. So let's call it, and then it's just gone up from there. And part of that obviously has been, as we talked about before the show, part of that has been from these contributions, just putting in cash, and part of that's been from market growth. But
yeah, it was a unique experience, and it was a little bit weird to spend several years saving like 40 to 70,000 a year and thinking that was really good, and then seeing it kind of go up exponentially at this point. So it's very, very like bizarre experience. It kind of makes me worry, like, I got the money so fast. Is it all gonna, easy come, easy go? Is it all gonna be gone the next day?
Yeah, is it gonna be gone just as fast?
Yeah. So in December 2019, my net worth was 475, and then in March 2020, so I measured this right about exactly at the bottom of that year, and my net worth is only down by 5K to 470, and the reason is because in those 3 months, I got my annual bonus and I maxed out my 401k and got the over $9,000 401k match, and and so I was down a lot in the stock market, but I was able to save like over 80,000 that quarter, and then the June 2020 was up to 617,000. Then September 693, December 819, March of this year it was at 978, and then just a couple weeks ago I measured it at 1.1 million.
It's amazing. So how fast do you think you'll get to the second? It obviously depends a lot on what the market does, but what's your take?
Yeah, I try to keep my estimates conservative. So even though I should be able to save well over 200,000, I'm just gonna, forecast $200,000 savings rate and then assume the market would be flat. So I should be able to get to 2 million in like 4 years, 4.5 years.
Yeah. So let me just piggyback off of your and Jay's conversation just a few minutes ago. We talked about living in a high cost of living area. You talked about there being a lot of money, that people are driving Teslas and Maseratis. How does that influence you? Does it make you want more money? Does it influence you?
I don't think there's like this culture where everybody has to match everybody. I feel like there's the group of people that, basically there's the group that budgets and the group that doesn't. And there's these two people kind of intermingled together. And, also like software engineers don't dress well. They don't try to like put on any appearance. So, sometimes we'll see like brand new Lamborghinis at my company's parking lot, which is interesting. But, no, I don't really think there's a pressure to like, act like, or to look like you belong there. I mean, I drive an old car, and like there's plenty of those, and you can even find neighborhoods where the homes are all $2 million, but the cars are all worth like 3,000.
Yeah. What do you drive?
It's a 2008 Ford Focus.
Okay. So, I mean, I think it's just an amazing story how fast you've been able to do it. Obviously, a big part of it has been your career, right? So is that, if you could point to a couple of your success, would it be your career development and how hard you worked at to build your income?
Yeah, I think it was a lot of luck on the timing. I grew up in the Bay Area, and I kind of stumbled on computer programming. I thought the idea of being able to control the computers was really interesting, and I started programming on my dad's like used TI-83 calculator when I was 14. So I just sort of jumped into the fields that was, very, very good field to be in, and also I was in the right area for that field. So that was all sort of just a positive thing for me. And then another big thing, like not everybody comes out of college without debt. So it was pretty great of my parents to, cover my living expenses while I was living at home and commuting to college, and to pay for the tuition. And
did you go to a state school, or was it a more expensive private school that they paid for?
Yeah, I went to San Jose State. Okay. It's yeah.
And so you mentioned your parents a little bit, and your dad there programming on his old calculator. Is that how you started learning about personal finance? Did they teach? Was a lot of this learned on your own? Yeah,
it's really hard to pinpoint like where I learned what I learned. So like timing wise, so I started working in 2011. In 2012 is when I started saving. And then in 2015 is when I kind of picked an asset allocation and started tracking net worth. So it really took like 3 to 4 years for me to figure out that I should be saving and to get it right and to figure out how to invest in that sort of thing. So I think I picked up some from my parents, some from talking to friends and family, and some from the personal finance Reddit and other websites, and podcasts and a couple books.
Do you plan on retiring early at all?
The idea came up before. It's very interesting. I hear of other people doing it. I don't think it's for me, but so it's not like I'm trying to save up the money so that I can retire. But what I see happening is when I reach age around 50, my kid would be in around college age. So at that point, when I presumably might have like several million and be able to retire, at that point I sort of get to decide if I want to, pack up and start a second career or if I want to keep working. So I guess we'll see when we get there.
Is there a target net worth for you at that point?
I'm kind of thinking more about the timing than the target net worth, because if I just sort of if I had to make a forecast, I could be at 5 or 6 million at that point when I'm around age 50, and I think that's enough to retire with. And I'm not sure if I'd feel comfortable retiring at age 40. It's just, my kid would be in school and it would kind of be strange timing wise, and probably not too interesting for me.
Yeah. Along that path, do you plan on buying a house?
Yeah, so I've been watching houses for sale on Zillow for a long time. The idea of buying rental real estate before a primary residence doesn't look too, like, my wife isn't too interested in it. It just kind of seems like the wrong order of operations. So I've been looking for the right time to buy a primary residence. And I in addition to just trying to figure out which city to buy in, it's also that homes here are very expensive compared to the rental price. And there's a lot of people buying because the prices go up, and that kind of concerns me. And it's not really my style. I prefer cash flow, but nothing cash flows in this state. So that's kind of a hard thing to get over, but I do plan to buy. I could give you some example numbers. So I saw this condo complex where there was one unit for sale and then an identical unit for rent. If I rent, it's $2,800. If I buy, it's $800,000. And so I was looking at basically what would the cap rate be if that was a rental, and it was something like a 2.5 cap. It was
it's insane, huh?
Yeah, it's not that interesting to me, because even if you buy it, the property tax and the HOA together is over $1,000, and then you've still got all the other expenses on it.
Yeah, it's nuts. It's a crazy world out there for sure. Being in the Bay Area amongst lots of millionaires, is money and investing openly discussed in the circles you're in, or not so much?
I think so. I have a group of friends that made a Facebook chat about it in the past. I talk about it with my brother sometimes. I talk about it with coworkers sometimes. Not talking about net worth so much, but maybe how to use the 401k options that our company provides. Yeah, I think people are in general transparent, like to some degree. I guess it's you can find people who feel like sharing it, but you can't go ask everybody how their finances are.
10 years from now, 20 years from now, you're worth multi-millions. Is there, you mentioned maybe pursuing another career. Is there something out there that interests you or intrigues you that maybe would be something for a second career?
I don't have one in mind, in particular. I think my wife has some plans for what she would do in retirement, and I do not yet have, but I think we have combined, I'm sure we have various ideas. So I think it'll just be a question of, are we enjoying our careers or not? If we're not enjoying, maybe we look for something else to get into.
Would you ever look at geo arbitrage and moving somewhere else, down the line? Or are you pretty set that, hey, you know what, I know it's expensive here, it just is what it is, and I'm going to live here and deal with it?
Yeah, it's so before the pandemic, I think my only options would have been basically the Bay Area and Seattle and potentially Austin. And then after the pandemic, with employers changing their policy, it might start working out to move to some cheaper area. So when I do the math, like I can save the most money each year by being in California, or Seattle. I think might come ahead just a little bit, but at some point, like maybe 5 or 10 years later, instead of looking at how much I can save each year, I'll be looking at how much I've already saved versus my cost of living, and at that point, yes, I'm open to relocating.
Yeah, makes sense. So, Kristopher, we talked a little bit about before the show that obviously you're working, your wife's working full time, you're living with your in-laws who are helping take care of your child. You mentioned that was obviously a little bit unique to your story. What's your take there, and how does that influence both your life and financially?
So I think so. Yeah, so we had our first kid in 2019, and I started budgeting when we were expecting, so in 2018. And it's very interesting to see how much my life changed from 2018 when I started budgeting to now. And I think it's been really good to have the budget over that time, so I kind of have a handle on the finances, and so things don't get out of hand. So I think it's interesting is when we had our kid at the same time, my in-laws moved, they immigrated from China to come live with us and take care of the baby. So our household jumped from 2 people to being a household of 5 people, like in 1 week. And we're covering the household expenses for them because they're helping us with the baby. So it's been interesting to see our income grow from like 180,000 in 2018 to something like 500,000 this year, and our household grow from 2 people to 5 people, and our budget, I could tell you what it is now, but it's only grown like 30% in expenses, even as the income tripled and the household size more than doubled. So I think that's kind of been the benefit of budgeting is like the benefit is not finding things to cut out of the budget, but the benefit has been keeping expenses where they are while other things increase.
So did you always budget?
Yeah, I really just started in 2018. And when I was like a household of 1 person, I knew where the money was going. And with a household of 2 people, I had like a kind of good idea where the money was going. And I think going beyond 2 people is the tipping point where I really need a budget to understand what's going on. I don't buy diapers or baby formula, but I know how much those are costing because we have the budget. So it's been useful.
Yeah. Well, let's wrap it up here, and we'll do so with some rapid fire questions before we get into some last mistakes and advice. So, have you ever used a financial advisor?
I have not, and it's mostly been because I just wanted to get hands-on and understand what was going on. But at the same time, I do, like now, I think maybe a fiduciary would have helped me get on the right track sooner.
Okay. What about the most expensive car you've ever purchased? How much was that?
It was around the $4,000 range.
Just 4?
Yeah, 4,000.
Oh, that's cheap, man. Nice.
Yeah.
What about meal out? Most expensive meal out that you've paid for?
It was around a $300 range, and it was kind of a mistake. Like we were splitting the bill, but some other friends were doing the ordering, and there was sort of a miscommunication.
And you walked away with the $300 bill. Nice. We talked about financial goals. Any books or products you recommend?
I think one book that's been useful, I mean, not like the book, but like one good book to add to the category was the first book from the Investing for Adults series by William J. Bernstein. It put some ideas in my head that I wasn't thinking about previously and that I hadn't picked up from other podcasts and stuff. It talks about transitioning from the wealth accumulation phase to the retirement phase, and it talks about funding retirement, and that's been, that's something good to think about. I think even 10 or 20 years before retirement, that can be useful to start getting prepared.
So what's been your biggest financial mistake, if you have one?
I mean, I guess in opportunity cost is where you'd probably find the biggest mistake. So, I mean, at the beginning, I had such a small amount of money that I'm sure I did make financial mistakes in how I invested or getting a slow start in saving. And I feel like those mistakes were small scale. But if you consider like, well, I could have bought a home and then it could have appreciated by $1 million, and that ends up being a very expensive mistake. So that's kind of my mindset. I started saving kind of as an amateur, and I started investing as an amateur, and there were many mistakes in that.
Okay. What's your last words of advice to somebody? If you had to give advice about what worked for you and someone was just starting on their path, what would you give? What would you say?
So I could sort of give an example of a category of mistake I've made, and I think it's a mistake maybe I've made multiple times, and maybe other people make this mistake too. So like, suppose you hear some good financial advice, like, hey, you shouldn't try to pick stocks to beat the market. The mistake is not acting on that information right away. So maybe what you should do is you should go, revisit your strategy for investing and decide what's the right path forward. But if instead you just sort of don't think about it, or you don't see the flaw in what you're doing, like you can easily kind of know in your head the good advice that you're hearing, but then you can not act on it for multiple years. And
yeah, great advice. Well, Kristopher, thanks so much for coming on. Really appreciate your time and sharing your story. Net worth of 1.1, more than that if you count the restricted stock units, or right, the stock units. Thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks, Kristopher.
Thanks for listening to the Millionaires Unveiled podcast with Clark Sheffield and Chase Mattinson. For more stories, investment opportunities, and information, check out our website at millionairesunveiled.com. See you next time when you'll hear from another everyday millionaire.